My name's Sam. I'm 32 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my family made it clear who the favorite was. Spoiler, it wasn't me. My older brother Daniel was the golden child from the very start. If he so much as sneezed, my parents rushed to comfort him with tissues and soup. When I broke my arm falling out of a tree at 9, I got a lecture about being careless and how hospital bills don't pay themselves. That was the pattern. Daniel shined, and I was expected to stay in the background. The favoritism wasn't hidden. When Daniel went to college, my parents paid his tuition, covered his rent for a downtown apartment, and even sent him extra money for groceries, which somehow turned into new sneakers and concert tickets. Meanwhile, I was working late nights at a diner just to afford community college. Whenever I asked for help, I got some version of, "Sam, you need to learn responsibility." And I did. Every dollar I scraped together, every meal I skipped, every shift I pulled, it all hardened me. Daniel, on the other hand, coasted. When he fell into thousands of dollars of credit card debt from a pyramid scheme, my parents swooped in and paid it off like heroes. The message was clear. Daniel's mistakes were excusable. Mine would have been proof that I was a failure. By 25, they helped Daniel put a down payment on a house in the suburbs. When I turned 25, I got a birthday card with $20 inside, signed, "Don't spend it all at once." I remember laughing bitterly at that. I had long stopped expecting fairness. Instead, I turned my resentment into motivation. I worked every job I could find, studied business at night, and started experimenting with side projects. First, I resold electronics. Then came small e-commerce ventures. And after years of trial and error, something finally took off. I built a logistics software company from scratch. Every ounce of energy went into it. While I quietly scaled the business, my parents kept bragging about Daniel's latest successes. They never once asked what I was doing, because they never cared. Fast forward a decade, my company got acquired. The deal closed last year for $25 million. There wasn't any big celebration. No champagne, no vacations. I just sat in my small apartment, staring at the signed papers, realizing what it felt like to finally win. But I didn't tell anyone in my family. I wanted to see how long it would take for them to notice, to finally see me. That brings us to last Christmas dinner. The family house looked like something out of a holiday movie. Every corner decorated, the table filled with food. Daniel walked in like royalty, his wife and kids following behind him. A new luxury watch glinted on his wrist, likely another gift funded by my parents. Mom hovered around him. Dad opened his favorite scotch, and the evening began like every other, me sitting quietly in the background. Passing plates, listening to Daniel complain about how small his year-end bonus was. The irony nearly made me laugh. Then my aunt, the only one I'd confided in, looked at me and asked casually, "Sam, how's the company doing? Last I heard, you closed that big deal." The table froze. Forks mid-air. My mom blinked, clearly confused. Daniel tilted his head, smirking, thinking it was a joke. "What deal?" he asked. I took a deep breath. "I sold my company last year." My dad frowned. "Company? What company?" "The logistics software I've been building for the past 10 years, I said calmly. "It was acquired for $25 million. Silence. My aunt smiled proudly, but my mom's expression twisted like I'd confessed to something awful. Daniel went pale, then red. His fork slipped from his hand. "20 what?" he stammered. "Million," I repeated. It was like dropping a bomb in the middle of the table. My parents looked at me, then at Daniel, then back again. Daniel began shaking his head, laughing nervously until his voice broke. "That's not fair," he said. You can't have that kind of money." Before I could react, he stood up, trembling, and then collapsed to the floor, crying uncontrollably. His wife rushed to him, but he kept sobbing, shouting, "It's not fair, I've done everything, and he gets 25 million. Then came the words I'll never forget. "You need to give me at least 15 million. I deserve it." I blinked, thinking I misheard. But my mom slammed her hands on the table. "You stole his future," she screamed. "You robbed your brother of what should have been his. How dare you hide this from us?" Chaos erupted. Daniel was on the floor, begging through tears. My mom was yelling, pointing at me like I'd committed a crime. My dad just sat there, stunned and muttering under his breath. I didn't say a word. I just watched, a mix of anger, disbelief, and an odd sense of clarity. After years of being invisible, I was finally seen and condemned for it. That Christmas dinner wasn't just awkward. It was a turning point. As Daniel cried, demanding millions, I knew deep down I wasn't done yet. When I replay that night in my head, it still feels unreal. You'd think if your child revealed such a massive achievement, one you never funded, never supported, you'd feel proud, even a little amazed. But not them. After I said $25 million, the warmth in the room evaporated. My aunt tried to lighten the mood, joking about me being the secret millionaire, but no one laughed. My mom looked furious. Daniel stayed on the floor, crying for 10 straight minutes. When he finally sat back down, his eyes were red, his hands shaking, muttering about how unfair life was. His wife dabbed his forehead like he was sick. My dad poured himself another drink and wouldn't look at me. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice sharp. "Why didn't you tell us? Why hide something like this from your family?" I felt everyone staring. I took a breath and said evenly, "Because nobody ever asked. That should have been enough." But she slammed her palm on the table again. "Don't be smart with me. You think this is funny? You think we wouldn't care?" I met her eyes. "You never cared about anything I did. Every time I tried to share something, you brushed it off. You only ever cared about Daniel." The air turned heavy. Mom's lips pressed tight. Dad sighed. Then Daniel looked up, glaring at me. "You're jealous," he snapped. "You've always been jealous. You only did all this to compete with me. I pushed you, so you owe me. That money's mine too." I almost laughed, but the seriousness in his voice stopped me. "What are you talking about?" I asked. He smirked weakly. "You only worked that hard because of me. I inspired you. So yeah, I deserve a share." And then Mom nodded, agreeing. "He's right, Sam." "Fair?" I echoed, my voice rising. "Was it fair when you paid his rent while I was eating canned soup every night? Was it fair when you bought him a house and told me to be responsible? Was it fair when you erased his debts but left me drowning in mine? You did everything for him and nothing for me. And now, after I finally build something on my own, you want to call it his?" My voice cracked at the end, not from weakness, but from the weight of finally saying what I'd held in for decades. The emotional weight of finally saying out loud what I'd kept buried for decades was almost unbearable. Daniel slammed his fist on the table. "I'm not asking for all of it, Sam. Just 15 million. You'll still have 10 left. That's more than enough for someone like you." "Someone like me?" I repeated slowly. "Yes," Mom hissed. "Someone who wouldn't have made it this far without this family's influence. I stared at her, stunned. What influence? You didn't help me with anything. You didn't even know what I was doing. But she doubled down, leaning forward, her eyes sharp. You grew up in this house. We gave you food, a roof, and education. You owe everything to us and to your brother. If you think otherwise, you're ungrateful. That word hit me harder than I expected. Ungrateful. I'd worked 3 jobs at once, slept in my car when rent was too high, skipped doctor visits because I couldn't afford them. And now they had the nerve to call me ungrateful? At that point, my aunt finally snapped. Are you all hearing yourselves? Sam worked nonstop for years, and none of you cared enough to notice. Now that he's successful, suddenly you're entitled to his money? It's disgusting. Mom turned toward her, eyes flashing. Stay out of this, Margaret. You've always been jealous of our family. Jealous? My aunt scoffed. Of what? Watching you spoil one child while ignoring the other? The room felt like a battlefield. Daniel's kids were quietly taken upstairs by his wife, who looked desperate to leave. My dad kept drinking in silence. But to me, that silence was agreement. Dinner was abandoned. Plates sat half-eaten, gravy thickening, wine untouched. Daniel muttered under his breath about being owed the money and how he'd never forgive me if I didn't share. Mom alternated between glaring at me and patting his shoulder like he was the victim of some injustice. Then came the final blow. Mom leaned across the table and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "If you don't give your brother what he deserves, you'll tear this family apart. Do you really want that on your conscience?" The manipulation was so obvious it almost made me laugh, but I didn't. I sat back, folded my arms, and stayed silent. My silence only made her angrier. For the next hour, the pressure built. Mom kept circling back, asking how I could live with myself while Daniel struggled and I hoarded money. Daniel sulked in the corner, throwing in passive-aggressive comments like, "Enjoy your millions while your family starves." He wasn't starving. He had a house and a steady job. My dad finally spoke for the first time that night. "Maybe you should just give him something, Sam. Keep the peace." That was the moment I saw how deep the favoritism ran. Even with the truth staring them in the face, they still chose him. Always him. When I stood to leave, Mom tried one last tactic. She grabbed my wrist and said, "Think about what's right, Sam. Your brother's future depends on you now. Don't be selfish." I pulled my arm free, looked her in the eyes, and said, "For once in my life, I'm going to be selfish." Then I walked out into the cold December night, my heart pounding, ears ringing with everything I'd just heard. But that dinner was only the beginning. The days that followed made everything worse. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word they'd thrown at me like a broken record. My brother demanding $15 million like it was owed to him. My mother shouting that I'd stolen his future. My father's weary advice to give in for peace. The more I thought about it, the more unreal it seemed. I'd spent my adult life grinding, sacrificing, clawing my way forward. And now that I'd made it, my own family treated me like a criminal. You'd think they'd be proud, or at least supportive. But instead, they turned my success into ammunition. By morning, I convinced myself they'd calm down, maybe even feel ashamed of their behavior. I was wrong. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Mom. No greeting, no small talk, just, "Have you thought about what we said?" I knew exactly what she meant. "About what?" I asked, pretending not to know. "Don't play dumb, Sam. Your brother's under stress. He hasn't slept. He feels betrayed. We've always taught you that family comes first. This is your chance to prove it. My grip on the phone tightened. So, you expect me to hand over $15 million just because Daniel cried about it? You make it sound so crude, she snapped. We're not asking for the world, just enough for Daniel to feel secure. He's always carried this family, Sam. He's earned it. That almost made me laugh. Daniel, the same brother whose debts had been cleared, whose rent and mortgage were covered, who couldn't manage a credit card responsibly, he had carried the family? I bit my tongue and said, "No, Mom, I'm not giving him anything." There was a pause. Then her voice dropped to a low, threatening tone I hadn't heard since I was a teenager. "You'll regret this, Sam. You can't turn your back on family without consequences." She hung up before I could respond. At first, I brushed it off as more manipulation. But I underestimated them. A week later, while checking my business accounts, I froze. Several large transfer attempts had been flagged for review. None had gone through, but the intended recipient? Daniel's personal account. I thought it was a phishing attempt, but when I called the bank, they said the requests used security information only someone close to me would know. That's when it hit me. My brother, or worse, my parents, had tried to access my funds. I remember sitting in my office, hands trembling. This wasn't entitlement anymore. It was theft. If the bank hadn't stopped it, I could have lost millions. I called Mom immediately. "Did you or Daniel try to access my accounts?" Her silence said everything. Then she spoke, calm as ever. "We were just making sure things were allocated fairly." "Allocated fairly?" I snapped. "That's not your money. You had no right to touch it." "We did what needed to be done." "Don't raise your voice at me." "Daniel is family," she said. "He deserves his share. If you won't do the right thing, then we will." I was stunned. My own mother had just admitted to trying to steal from me and spoke as if it were nothing. "You realize that's illegal," I said, shaking with anger. "You could go to prison for this." "You wouldn't send your own family to prison," she said smugly. "Besides, who would believe you? You've always been bitter, always playing the victim. We'll make sure everyone knows how selfish you really are." That line hit hard, not because it was true, but because I knew they could make others believe it. To outsiders, Daniel was the charming golden boy. I was the quiet one. Who would they side with? The beloved son or the one who'd always been overlooked? I hung up before saying something I'd regret. The betrayal was unbearable, but it didn't stop there. Soon, word spread among extended relatives. Cousins, uncles, people I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly reached out. "Hey, heard about your big payday. Let's catch up." Or worse, "Your brother says you're refusing to help family. That true?" It became clear they'd twisted the story, painting me as the greedy villain, hoarding money, while poor Daniel suffered. They left out the part where my parents had bought him a house and cleared his debts. The worst blow came when I showed up at my parents' house unannounced, hoping to confront them face to face. A new luxury car sat in the driveway, dealership plates still on. Inside, Daniel sat grinning, jingling the keys. "Nice ride, huh?" he said. "Figured I deserved to treat myself." My blood ran cold. "How did you pay for that?" He stretched, smug. "Family takes care of each other. Mom and Dad knew you'd come around eventually, so they helped me get a head start." I turned to my parents. "You used my money, didn't you?" Mom didn't even flinch. "Consider it in advance. You'll understand one day." That was the breaking point. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about trust, respect, and basic decency. They had stolen from me and justified it as fairness. I stood there, fists clenched, heart pounding. Something inside me broke. There was no going back. While they were busy betraying me, I was already thinking several steps ahead. I left without a word. Sitting in my car outside, I stared at the house where all my childhood memories lived, every forgotten birthday, every time I'd been pushed aside for my brother. Even now, they'd proven I never truly mattered. I drove home in silence. The winter air pressed against the windows. My apartment felt colder than ever. I didn't turn on the lights, just sat in the dark, completely drained. The following weeks blurred together. I ignored their calls. Daniel left smug voicemails pretending to care. "Hey, Sammy. Just checking in. You can't hold on to that money forever. Family shares, you know." He sounded like the reasonable one. I avoided extended family too. The rumors had already spread. My cousin even messaged, "Why are you being so cold? Daniel says you're refusing to help after everything your parents did for you." Everything they did for me. A roof, food, and school. Basic parenting. Meanwhile, Daniel got houses, tuition, and bailouts. Work used to be my escape, but not anymore. Every meeting, every email felt heavy with paranoia. What if they tried again? Could they twist the story in court? I checked my accounts constantly, barely sleeping. The exhaustion consumed me. I withdrew from everyone. I didn't tell friends because I was ashamed. Who wants to admit their own family betrayed them? One night at 2 a.m., I sat at my kitchen table writing everything down. Every slight, every manipulation, every theft. At first, it was just venting, but soon it became structured, like a case file. Maybe I was trying to find clarity, or maybe I was preparing for what came next. The lowest moment came when I ran into an old friend, Josh. He didn't know about any of it. We chatted, and then he asked, "So, how's your family?" I froze. For a second, I almost lied, but I just said, "Complicated." He smiled gently. "Families are messy sometimes, but at the end of the day, they're all we've got, right?" I nodded, but inside I wanted to scream. The truth was, I didn't have a family anymore. They'd chosen greed over me again and again. That night, I realized I was mourning them. Mourning parents who never saw me. Mourning a brother who saw me as competition. Mourning the idea of a family I never truly had. It was grief, but also clarity. If they wanted to see me as selfish, fine. If they wanted to call me ungrateful, fine. I wasn't going to destroy myself trying to prove otherwise. But I also wasn't going to let them take what I built. So I started taking steps, quietly, carefully. I reached out to a lawyer I trusted. I told him everything, every attempt to access my accounts, every manipulation, every lie. He listened, leaned forward, and said, "Sam, you need to protect yourself." I began protecting myself legally, financially, and personally. I moved assets into trusts my family couldn't access, changed passwords, tightened account security, and added extra verification. I prepared legal documents so they couldn't claim my assets if something happened to me. It was tedious, exhausting, and heartbreaking to do, but it gave me a small sense of control when everything else felt out of hand. Emotionally, I hit rock bottom. I stopped celebrating small wins. I stopped cooking, and I lost weight. My apartment got messy. Dishes piled up, laundry went undone. Some mornings, I didn't want to get out of bed. My brother's smug face replayed in my mind. My mother's sharp accusations echoed, and my father's silence felt like a heavy weight. Yet beneath that despair, a tiny ember began to glow. It was fragile at first, but each memory of Daniel's luxury car, each recall of my mother calling me selfish, every twisted rumor fed that ember until it sharpened into resolve. I didn't know exactly what I would do, but I knew I wouldn't stay at the bottom. They wanted me ashamed, broken, obedient. I refused to be that shadowed child anymore. My recovery wasn't dramatic. I rose with quiet, deliberate steps, planning, preparing, and building things they couldn't touch. The weeks after my lowest point felt like slogging through mud. Every step was exhausting, but standing still would have meant drowning. Hitting rock bottom stripped away illusions. I stopped hoping my parents would suddenly understand. I stopped wishing for Daniel's respect. That fantasy died, leaving clarity. I had built something on my own and needed to protect and grow it so it could become my foundation, not them. The comeback began with small routines, morning runs even when I didn't want to, cooking proper meals instead of living on takeout, and scheduling regular meetings with my lawyer and accountant. I started therapy, which I'd resisted for years, sitting in that quiet office and describing the weight of being invisible to your family. Of betrayal that leaves you sleepless felt both humiliating and freeing. My therapist told me, "Your family made you believe love is conditional. That's not your burden." Hearing that clicked something in me. I realized I wasn't only angry. I'd been carrying shame, guilt, and a hunger for approval that never arrived. Letting those go was hard, but naming them felt like the first breath after being underwater too long. Business momentum followed the acquisition. My name circulated in investor circles. People invited me to advisory boards and new projects. At first, I hesitated. My wounds were still fresh, but I accepted a few opportunities that excited me. One was a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs. I partnered with a nonprofit teaching business basics to underprivileged kids. Standing in that classroom, telling them how I'd worked nights in a diner and failed more times than I could count before succeeding, I felt purpose again. These teens listened and respected me without entitlement. That response fueled me. I grew smarter financially. My lawyer helped build layered trusts and shell entities, structures that protected assets while ensuring regulatory transparency. I wasn't only defending against family claims. I was future-proofing my finances. My accountant joked that even the best lawyers couldn't untangle the web. With fear reduced, I began taking calculated risks, investing in a Chicago logistics startup, buying undervalued commercial property poised for development, and quietly backing tech ventures, this time as the invisible force, not the public face. Success tends to compound. One big win opens doors, and people start seeking your advice. I went from being ignored to being sought after. With every right yes, my leverage grew. On a personal level, I traveled, not to show off, but to breathe. I spent weeks in Japan, wandering Kyoto temples and journaling, hiked in Patagonia, and took pasta-making classes in Italy. Each trip reclaimed parts of myself I'd been too afraid to embrace. I reconnected with old friends. Most were simply happy to see me well. They didn't expect a share of my success, just conversation, laughter, and dreams. Those friendships reminded me what real connection is, something my family never offered. My parents and Daniel didn't stop. They continued spreading their version of events. Distant relatives messaged thinly veiled judgments, accusations that I'd changed or become too proud. Initially, those words hurt, but I learned to let them talk. Their gossip had no power against what I was building. Eventually, a mutual friend of Daniel's reached out privately and admitted people were starting to see through Daniel's complaints. That crack in the dam showed how the favored narrative was shifting. By spring, I felt stronger. My projects succeeded. My health improved, and my mind cleared. I realized power wasn't just money. It was freedom. The freedom from needing their approval, from manipulation, and to define myself. With that freedom came a new thought. If I could rise above them, I could also turn the tables, strategically, not vindictively. I wanted something precise and unavoidable. Proof so clear there'd be no room for their stories. The ember from rock bottom became a controlled fire. I doubled down on legal and financial defenses, robust trusts, staggered fund releases, multiple custodians, independent trustees reporting to trusted law firms. My lawyer, Claire, precise and unflappable, ran chess-like scenarios. What would they try first, second, third? For every move we designed counters. But paperwork alone wouldn't blunt their narrative. Stories are shaped by people, and people talk. I needed witnesses who could confirm the truth, that I built my life through scraping and effort, that Daniel had been supported by our parents, and that some attempted transfers were orchestrated from inside the house. Quiet digging paid off. I gathered confirmations, emails, bank notices, receipts, voicemails. I asked my accountant Priya for a timeline of payouts and loans from my parents to Daniel. Initially reluctant, she grew clinical as she compiled a spreadsheet showing mortgages paid, credit cards cleared, rent covered, and down payments wired from accounts listing my parents as the origin. Each entry was marked as gift, loan, or family assistance. Messy, but revealing a pattern. I hired a private investigator, an uncomfortable step, but necessary. He searched for documents, dealership invoices, transaction authorizations, bank IP logs, signature checks, evidence of hands-on intrusion rather than rumor. He found a dealership receipt for Daniel's car and email threads between the dealership and my parents arranging payment. He located warranty paperwork for appliances bought by my parents right after the alleged bank transfer attempt. Mundane paperwork, but powerful evidence. I also spoke quietly with outsiders who knew my family, neighbors, a former teacher, the baker my mother gossiped with. They confirmed small facts. Daniel didn't work nights. My parents often helped him financially, and they'd celebrated him differently than me. Those human details added context. I recorded interviews with consent, so there'd be no he said, she said. Meanwhile, I started telling my story publicly on my terms, talking about failures, late nights, the mentorship work. The narrative of a comeback and grit began to counter my mother's "he's changed" campaign. It wasn't a PR stunt. It was reclaiming my voice. I also reached out to people in Daniel's circle, vendors, a landlord, former clients, and asked for honesty. No threats, just the truth. The landlord recalled late payments. A vendor admitted the idea Daniel claimed credit for had been mine years earlier. Small threads stitched together into a fabric I could point to. Legally, Claire and I filed two discreet but strategic actions. One was an injunction requesting a bank forensic audit and full logs of the attempted transfers, framed as suspected fraud, not a family spat. The bank, wary of liability, complied and produced records tying IP addresses to the house, with timestamps matching calls my mother made. The other was a formal cease and desist to my parents, polite and calm in tone but unmistakable in message. Stop attempting access or coercion. It was a satisfying, firm move. A surprising discovery came from Daniel's old mortgage agreement. A guarantor clause showing my parents had acted as guarantors. In certain wording, this allowed them to later classify funds as reimbursements rather than gifts. A backdoor that cleaned tracks. Claire's reaction confirmed it. Their bookkeeping could be turned against them. Finding that was a strange victory. A former colleague turned reporter reached out after one of my talks and proposed a neutral profile on how success reshapes family ties. I hesitated. I didn't want to weaponize sympathy, but a balanced third-party piece that told my truth could shift conversations among relatives and acquaintances. Still, with evidence, allies, and legal protections, nothing felt like petty revenge. I wanted accountability. Proof they tried to steal from me, that their claims were self-serving, and that their moral authority was fragile. To achieve that, I mapped a multi-front plan, combining legal consequence, public exposure, and undeniable documentation. The plan? First, the bank audit and forensic logs for legal backbone. Second, a carefully placed profile in a reputable outlet to present the truth publicly. Third, a civil suit for attempted theft and fraud. To force sworn depositions or a quiet settlement, depositions would require testimony under oath. Fourth, lining up witnesses. My aunt, the landlord, the dealership owner, so their stories match the paper trail. I planned contingencies. If they filed a declaratory judgment, smeared investors, or threatened slander suits, we had responses. Claire joked that truth and documentation are solid defenses. Still, I worried about the human cost. Family fights get messy, and collateral damage could be real. The aunt dragged into court, my father's health affected by stress. I didn't want ruin. I wanted truth and restitution. I pictured a quiet courtroom where facts were presented and people answered for choices. Fair and final, not melodramatic. So I set the last pieces in motion. The bank audit returned logs pointing to my parents' IP. The dealership confirmed. The wire instructions suspiciously matched the dates of attempted transfers, and a few hesitant relatives quietly admitted that Mom had been pushing her story relentlessly. Claire drafted the complaint, not as a furious outburst, but as a precise document listing specific incidents, dates, and legal grounds. The reporter's interest deepened, promising a full profile. Priya finished the financial timeline, and the private investigator handed me a thick folder filled with receipts and timestamps that outlined a history of entitlement. One evening, sitting at my kitchen table with that folder spread open, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Calm. The anger was gone. What remained was a clear plan. I could see each step ahead. File the lawsuit. Let the record speak. Allow the witnesses to confirm. And let the truth do what manipulation never could. Stand undeniable. I called Claire and told her I was ready. She asked, "Are you prepared for how this will look?" I thought of Daniel's smugness, my mom's satisfaction, and the countless nights I felt invisible. I thought of the mentorship kids who now looked at me differently. I said, yes. The next morning, I emailed Claire the file with a single line in the subject, "Proceed when ready." Then I waited for her reply, and for the moment everything I had quietly gathered would finally move. When Claire filed the complaint, it felt oddly calm. Just paperwork filed, copies served, the legal version of pushing the first domino. But the real satisfaction wasn't in filing. It was watching the machine I'd built begin to move with steady inevitability. Their lawyer began with talk about family unity and the pain public litigation could cause. Claire calmly handed over the bank logs. The room fell silent as timestamps and IP addresses scrolled across the screen. She explained clearly that the attempted transfers originated from their home network, and that dealership wires matched call logs from their numbers. No accusations, just facts. Mom's face changed color. "There must be an explanation," she stammered. "We were just trying to help." The same excuse softened for a conference table. I felt detached. I'd heard it all before. Scripted remorse without accountability. Then Claire called my aunt to speak, not officially, but informally. She opened her folder and played the recorded call. My aunt's calm voice described how I had confided in her months earlier, how shocked she'd been by my parents' behavior, and how Mom had begun making remarks about fair shares. Hearing my aunt calmly recount the truth felt like a private exoneration. The opposing counsel shifted uncomfortably. No settlement yet, just veiled threats and false concern. "If we settle quietly," Dad's lawyer said, "we can avoid embarrassment." Claire replied, "If they settle, it must account for the harm done and prevent future interference." She looked at me. I nodded. I wanted two things: transparency and protection. If money was paired of it, fine, but only with public correction and legal safeguards. No hush deals. That night, the reporter called. His article would run Thursday. He'd interviewed me about my work, my slow wins, and balanced it with quotes from my aunt, my landlord, and vendors. It wasn't a hit piece. It was honest. It showed how success changes family dynamics and how entitlement can disguise itself as virtue. When the article was published, reactions flooded in. Messages of support, disbelief, and validation from people who'd once stayed silent. ... The combination of evidence and storytelling shifted perception in a way raw facts couldn't. Suddenly, the family narrative wasn't believable anymore. Then came the depositions. They were methodical, cutting through emotion to reveal facts. I watched from a side room as my parents testified. The opposing side tried painting me as cold, but the documents told the truth. The PI's receipts, dealership invoice, IP logs, all pointed to one story. I'd imagined this process would exhaust me, but instead, it cleansed me. Under oath, lies had consequences. Watching my family answer to specifics made me feel less like a victim, more like someone defending truth. At one point, they tried discrediting my aunt by dragging up an old argument. She didn't falter. Calmly, she recounted my years of struggle, nights working, paying my own tuition, sleeping in my car. Her honesty hit the room hard. It was a moment when truth outweighed every pretense. Outside the courtroom, their circle tightened. Friends distanced themselves. Invitations stopped. Daniel's carefully crafted image cracked. Gossip spread. The illusion collapsed. Power fades fast when its foundation is exposed. Offers came in. Quiet settlements for large sums, if I'd agree to silence. Claire noted them. If they accept, demand public correction and legal protection. Otherwise, decline. I did. I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability, formal acknowledgement, corrected records, and guarantees. The day before mediation, opposing counsel called with a bizarre idea: a televised family reconciliation. Claire replied, "If they want healing, start with restitution and public correction, not cameras." They were desperate. Mediation day was cold and clear. I drove there alone, calm. Claire carried the documents. My parents arrived defensive. Daniel clung to false hope. The mediator began with talk of family restoration. Then, reality set in. Each attempt to reframe the evidence failed as Claire presented more documents. The mediator's expression shifted from neutral to uneasy. Dad's voice cracked. Mom's hands shook. Daniel looked lost. Claire asked for what was fair: repayment for unauthorized purchases, public correction, and a no-contact clause protecting my finances. Dad's lawyer muttered about dignity. Claire replied simply, "Agree or we proceed to trial. The evidence speaks." Then silence, heavy and final. The mediator asked if they understood the consequences of perjury. They nodded weakly. Just as they were about to respond, opposing counsel's phone buzzed. He excused himself, returned minutes later with a forced smile, and mentioned new information. Claire's eyes narrowed. "If this is an intimidation tactic," she said, "we'll proceed legally." Moments later, an assistant entered with a folder. Inside was a statement from the bank, confirming the transfers came from my parents. Home IP and devices, and that dealership funds were from their joint account. The room froze. My mother turned pale. My father looked defeated. Daniel fidgeted nervously. Claire reviewed the documents, nodded, and said, "This confirms everything." The mediator asked, "Do you contest this?" Mom whispered, "We didn't mean to. We were trying to be fair." Claire answered gently, "Intent doesn't erase action." The mediator summarized the facts: unauthorized access, misused funds, confirmed by the bank and dealership. "How do you wish to resolve this before trial?" Daniel exploded, shouting about humiliation and how much he deserved. The mediator silenced him. "This is about facts, not entitlement." Claire slid a typed page across. "Our terms remain: repayment, written admission, and a legal restriction from accessing his finances." Mom's voice trembled. "You want us to sign something saying we stole from our son?" Claire replied, "Your reputation is already at risk." Signing shows accountability. Refusal leads to public trial. Silence filled the room. Finally, Dad said quietly, "We can't win this." Mom glared at him, horrified, but he continued, "It's over." The mediator asked for agreement. Mom looked at me, anger mixed with fear, then signed. Dad followed. Daniel resisted, insisting he did nothing wrong. Claire reminded him that his name appeared on the transfer logs. "Would you like to be included individually in the complaint?" she asked. He froze, then signed. Just like that, it was done. No shouting, just signatures sealing what couldn't be undone. As I left, Mom hissed, "You'll regret this. You destroyed this family." I stopped at the door. "No, Mom," I said evenly. "You destroyed it when you chose greed over love. I just stopped letting you take me with you." Outside, the winter air hit like a clean slate. Claire walked beside me, quiet but proud. That night, I looked over the signed agreements: admissions, protections, restitution. My phone filled with messages of support. For once, I felt steady, free. Daniel sold the car to pay part of what he owed. My parents withdrew from their social world. Their story collapsed under their own signatures. And me? I kept working, mentoring, living. Not out of revenge, but peace. Because now I understood something deeply. Family isn't who shares your blood. It's who honors your soul. And as I locked the final folder away, I whispered to myself, They wanted my future, but it was never theirs to claim.